Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history. Make America great again. How can you be against it?
Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and I'm joined by Rhonda Colvin, senior political correspondent, James Hohmann, editorial writer and columnist, and Emily Davies, White House reporter as of yesterday. Prior to this, Emily's been covering the federal workforce for the Washington Post. Usually when people get a stint on the White House beat, they get busier. Emily, you can't get busier because you have been so busy covering Trump's impact on the federal workforce, and we're going to talk a lot about that today because we're reflecting on 100 days of this Trump presidency. We'll look at President Trump's promises, his actions, and how Americans are feeling about Trump's shock and awe strategy. Here's a brief summary of how the first 100 days have gone.
We're going to end Ukraine fast. I'm going to end it fast. I know both. I know Zelensky. I know Putin very well. I'm going to get it ended. Starting on day one, we will end inflation and make America affordable again to bring down the prices of all goods. First full day as president, we're back. We are going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. I think Canada would be much better off being a 51st state. I rebuilt our military. A lot of it was given away to Afghanistan, but it was a lot, but a very small portion. We're going to be cutting taxes, and it's possible we'll do a complete tax cut because I think the tariff will be enough to cut all of the income tax. I promised my wife I would never use a bad word. The case against me was bull. I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They were getting yippee. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't have. You're playing cards.
In this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Why don't you wear a suit?
I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh? This is going to be great television. I will say that.
President Trump, in his own words, the first 100 days. Okay, Rhonda, James, Emily, what do you hear in that? Did you even forget some of those episodes that happened?
I haven't forgotten, but it does show you the whirlwind of the last 100 days. I think it also shows you just how widespread all of his decisions have been. It's not just on one area, which a lot of presidents do focus on when they are looking at what to do in their 100 days. It's all over the place. It's foreign affairs. It's his relationship with the judiciary and Congress. It's all sort of things.
Yeah, in this sense, Donald Trump has the advantage of having been president before, but this is a brand new term with 4 years in between, so we are viewing it as this first 100-day benchmark. Emily, he came in with a plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was thinking of as we watched that clip just now is he's entertaining. He's interesting to watch. And I think covering what he does every day, it's easy to forget that. And then seeing him sort of compiled like that, I understand why, a lot of voters watch him a lot and spend a lot of time listening to him on the radio, watching him on TV. It's just, he's fun to watch.
He is trying to make good television.
Mm-hmm. And it is good television. I mean, half the world is in stitches. Half the world is scared. I mean, people do find Trump funny. He is obviously a lot funnier than Joe Biden is. What I was struck by watching that montage is how little of it had to do with Congress. Normally, the idea of the 100-day thing started during the New Deal with Franklin Roosevelt, and it was because he passed so many bills during the first 100 days. And he funded the government once for a few months, but everything he's done has been executive orders. It's been a whirling dervish of activity, but it frankly has not included a lot of legislation coming to his desk from Capitol Hill, even though his party controls both chambers.
Yeah, such a sharp observation. We're going to do a quick fire list of some of President Trump's promises and where the pledges are at. Now, it's only 100 days in, but he had a lot of day one promises. So let's go. Did he end inflation?
No.
Did he end Russia's war on Ukraine, Rhonda?
He did not.
Not yet.
Emily, did he eliminate the Department of Education?
He is trying, but it still stands.
Did he pardon the J6 rioters and attackers, Rhonda?
On day one.
Did he end the Green New Deal on day one, James?
He has rolled back a lot of what Biden did, but he hasn't gotten rid of the Inflation Reduction Act or various other things that did speed along the green transition.
What about banning transgender people from serving in the military?
He tried through an executive order also on day one that right now is in the courts. A few days ago, he actually asked the Supreme Court to undo a decision by a lower court to stop that policy at the Pentagon to ban transgender military members.
Emily, what about firing civil servants? He specifically called for reissuing an executive order to be able to remove rogue bureaucrats. I'm putting that in air quotes.
I think he has made quite good on that promise.
Let's talk about this next one, immigration, invoking the Alien Enemies Act to remove all known or suspected gang members, drug dealers, cartel members, Rhonda.
Yes, that is something that he did act on. Of course, that is going through the courts as we speak, a lot of high-profile cases, and has used the Alien Enemies Act to do that, which he promised to do back on the campaign trail.
Although I will say he hasn't deported as many people as we expected. When he said use it to deport all known or suspected gang members, he hasn't done that. They're not anywhere close to their goal of 1 million deportations the first year, partly because it has gotten so caught up in the courts.
What about ending birthright citizenship, James?
He issued the order. It's going to the Supreme Court. They got at least 4 justices. You only need 5 who are willing to hear the case. So that's going to be one of the big issues to watch this term.
Restore and expand the Trump travel ban, known as the Muslim ban?
Yeah, I mean, he really has limited, he's made it much harder for people that he doesn't want coming into the country to get into the country, whether legally or illegally.
Tariffs, a lot of promises to enact tariffs, Rhonda, including a 20% tax on cars coming from overseas.
Yes, he has made good on the promise to tariff, which again was a campaign promise. There right now is a pause, but this is a continuing story.
Trump promised to appoint a special prosecutor to go after Joe Biden and, more broadly, prosecute his rivals, Emily.
I would say he's on the path to doing so. We haven't seen the full extent of his promise play out just yet.
But he's going after law firms and universities and other organizations he deemed to be against him. What about making the Trump tax cuts permanent?
In the works. That is something Congress is working on through the process of reconciliation. So that may be a part of that so-called big, beautiful bill. We'll see.
Build an iron dome over the nation, James.
He's taking steps. It's not particularly feasible, but they are doing the initial steps at the Pentagon. Pete Hegseth has made it a priority.
How about expanding access to IVF? Trump said he would be the fertilization president.
I've talked to a lot of people who voted for him actually for that reason, and they tell me that they have not seen that yet.
James, finally enlist the National Guard to restore law and order in cities where there's been a complete breakdown of public safety.
That has not happened.
So bottom line, James, what does all that add up to?
He is seen as a president of action, that he's doing a lot. He actually has, he bit off a lot. He wasn't able to chew it all, but has done quite a lot. It has been a pretty consequential first 100 days. And we've basically gotten back into a very polarized country where the majority of Americans don't approve of what he's doing, but he has a solid base that feels like he really is delivering, that it's promises made and promises kept.
Rhonda?
Yeah, I think it's the $1 million question to look at his last 100 days and to realize that he really did say a lot of these things on the campaign trail, even the most controversial things. He said it multiple times and has been acting on them. So for his base, which a lot of the polling, and I think we'll get into that a little later, the polling is suggesting his base is there, it's sturdy, but a lot of Americans are feeling uncomfortable with how much he has tried to expand the presidential powers.
So there seems to be a disconnect sometimes between what President Trump says and what he'll actually do. Like, you talk to some supporters and they're like, well, he's not actually going to go that far, but they like the spirit of it. But these, like you said, Rhonda, are promises he made, pledges he made, things he said he'd do, and he's kind of doing them to the shock of many.
That's right. One of the biggest examples that I point to a lot is the use of the Alien Enemies Act, because a lot of people had not heard of it just a few weeks ago, but it was something that was actually in the GOP platform that was voted on at the RNC. It's right there. I believe it was page 8. It says we're going to use this in order to do the mass deportations goal. So it was there. A lot of this was there. And it is sort of maybe a cognitive dissonance that a lot of voters are having, that they thought, he said he would do these things, but they didn't exactly vote on those things. And now they're experiencing what it feels like to have all of this going on in the last 100 days.
Emily?
I think an interesting thing about covering Trump, looking back at these first 100 days, is that we have to be careful and intentional about how much we cover about what he says. Whereas traditionally, if a president speaks and says something that has to do with policy or executive action, like that is immediately a story, and we all assume it's going to happen in some way, shape, or form. This president speaks a lot, and so we have to really look at what he's doing. And so I think looking back at these last 100 days, the promises are really interesting, but the follow through on them, where he's willing to take risks with the courts, where he's not, where he's ready to sort of wait for Congress, and where he feels like he doesn't need them, is really revealing of his priorities more than the promises he made on the trail, honestly. I think there's this question as we see people who vote for Trump suffering in many ways because of the policies that he is implementing, if they knew what they were signing up for. And I think in many ways they maybe did or maybe didn't care because they believe in this person. But Trump also on the campaign trail said things that are counter to what he's done. For example, he really distanced himself from Project 2025. He said that it was not a key part of his platform and not a part of his platform at all. And now a lot of what's happened to the federal workforce was laid out in that plan.
And its main architect, Russ Vought, is a key player in the administration and what's happening.
Right. He's very high up. I mean, he faced members of Congress in a confirmation hearing and, did not back down from any of his claims or any of his priorities that were outlined in that plan. So I think when we look at those voters who supported Trump and wonder if they knew what they were getting into, I think what Trump said about Project 2025, that it was not his, is an important piece of that puzzle.
It's really important to remember that, because he did distance himself, and there is so little daylight between what he is doing and the Project 2025 blueprint in many ways.
Yeah, and I think the Democrats on the campaign trail had a hard time finding issues that really resonated with voters that were critical of Trump, and Project 2025 was one of them.
Remember the Democratic convention, how they brought a giant book of Project 2025 out?
Factory menu or something.
It was
and they
massive.
kept doing segments on it.
It was this is what's going to happen. Right.
And so it sort of forced Trump to respond to it.
Foil.
And he did, and is now not keeping that promise.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, there are things that Democrats warned he would do that he has not done, at least in the first 100 days, and there's pressure on him to move, but he has not tried to ban abortion. He's not taken steps, you asked about IVF, but he hasn't taken steps to restrict access to mifepristone, for example. And that is consistent, I guess, with what he promised to do, which was to leave it to the states. And that was something that we obviously heard Democrats really trying to make an issue out of. And I think ultimately they didn't use it as potently as they did in the 2022 midterms because Trump said it was off the table.
So a big part of Trump's first 100 days has been this shock and awe campaign on a range of issues. Let's talk about DOGE as a tool to really demolish and reform the federal workforce, Emily.
I think it's certainly shocked and awed. I mean, it's far more wide-reaching than I think most of us in this newsroom imagined it would be, even, at least speaking for myself. That's certainly the case. It's reached a lot of pockets of the country where people aren't normally that engaged with politics, especially not after an election year. People's neighbors are being fired, their aunts, cousins, daughters are being let go. And so this politics that I think in many other years is easy for people to ignore has become really intimate and personal. And so I think when you talk about the effect of the first 100 days, the federal workforce and the changes there are some of the most profoundly tangible for people across the country.
Yeah, I think when we talk about his campaign promises, and like I said, he said a lot of it on the trail. However, with DOGE, that is one area where a lot of people are right to be shocked and dismayed at how far-reaching it was. Because if you remember, back in December, January, the idea of DOGE was still being figured out, in real time. I remember Musk was on the Hill meeting with senators trying to figure out how it would all work. For a brief time, Ramaswamy was with him, but we didn't quite realize, the country didn't, I don't think, realize how far-reaching DOGE would go, how much, free reign they apparently had with the president. So I do think that's an area when you examine the 100 days where people should probably be shocked or, an eyebrow raised at how a pseudo agency came in and did all of this in such short order.
With the goal of saving money. Now, they have dramatically reduced the goal of how much they're actually going to save, James. But do we know the full ramifications on sort of American daily life, whether it's trying to get your Social Security check or get somebody on the phone at IRS or visit a national park? Do we know what the results of that will be yet?
We don't. And it's going to take a while. A lot of these things, for example, the national parks in the summer, we've heard a lot of warnings that it's going to be a mess. There's going to be long lines. We'll see. And Elon Musk
also fired people and then rehired them.
Exactly.
Like the Park Service,
and Elon Musk's view is that you delete, and then you build back some of the things that you realize if you cut into the bone. And that has honestly worked for him at SpaceX and Tesla. We'll see. I think in some areas, it's not going to be as bad as dire warnings. In other areas we're not paying attention to, it'll be much worse. Immigration.
Let's talk about deportations and arrests. James, you mentioned earlier that they are far behind their aggressive goals of deportations and also limiting entrances. Well, they actually are successfully limiting entrances.
Yeah.
It's the deportations number.
I mean, virtually no one is coming across the southern border. And some of that is trends that started in the Biden administration. I do think the cruelty has a strong deterrent effect. It's stopping people from trying to come into the United States. And that sort of is part of the point.
On the campaign trail, Trump touted family separation as a way that deterred people, right? No, people didn't want to come here and have their families separated, which would be very alarming. What about the concerns, the sort of the backlash we are seeing now with the realities of lack of due process, Rhonda, some of the shocking conditions of those who've been removed from the country and not just deported, but sent to a maximum security, really brutal prison in El Salvador?
Yeah, on one hand, you're looking at his acts on immigration and deportations and seeing that it is at least starting to fulfill what he said he would do, even though he hasn't reached those numbers. But on the other hand, there was also all of these side effects. You can look at some of the colleges and universities who have students who really don't know their future, if they're foreign students and don't know if they'll be able to come back next summer. There was also the issue of even people traveling to the United States. I actually looked it up a few weeks ago, and travel is down from foreign countries into the United States. That affects tourism. That affects, places like DC, where a lot of their budget does, rely on people coming in and touring DC. So you are seeing side effects, even though his moves on immigration, deportations are still being tangled up in the courts. They're still having these after effects and chilling effects.
Some of our latest reporting shows that 3 children who are American citizens were removed from this country. I don't even know if we can call it being deported because they are not going back to their home countries. This is their home country. They were sent abroad with their mothers who were here undocumented, who were in the system. But there's a lot of questions, Emily, we're asking as journalists about how quickly it happened. Were the other family members given a chance to keep the children here? The TikTok is murky, and it's raising not just questions with the American public, but also with judges and lawyers.
Yeah, one thing that's been, to me, really interesting and important about these last 100 days is normally on the campaign trail, we spend a lot of time as reporters and candidates spend a lot of time talking about what type of country we are and what type of country we want to be. But then once a president takes office, it becomes more about like details and policy and nuance. And what's happening from the Trump administration, immigration in particular, is so extreme. And it's really forced a very open conversation about who we are as a country, who's welcome here, who's not, who we should, prop up and elevate and promote, and who we should fire. It's just been, I think, a really revealing time about how people feel at a very high level about what America is and should be.
100 days in, a lot of actions on immigration, but we're watching now to see the court results, James, how some of this legal process actually plays out, which can move a lot slower than the shock and awe methods of Donald Trump.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court has shown indications of getting more engaged and more involved the Trump folks knew this was part of the strategy. They had 4 years to think this through. Let's throw as much against the wall as we can and see what sticks, what we can get through the courts. They fully anticipated that courts would block a lot of what they did. They've obviously, understandably, been frustrated about the temporary restraining orders where a district court judge can issue an injunction that stops the entire program. The same thing happened to Joe Biden. And so I think that they, in some ways and in areas, haven't been able to move as fast as they anticipated, but they did expect that there would be friction with the courts. And we've talked about it a lot on the show. Thus far, they have not openly, explicitly defied any court rulings. So the rule of law has been threatened and challenged in other ways, but it is held in
They've been walking a pretty
they've danced up to the line.
tightrope.
It's a hokey pokey thing. They put one foot over the line and then pull it back. And, they have not, we've not had the constitutional crisis that I think a lot of people expected.
Let's talk about trade and tariffs, Rhonda. We are still watching to see all these deals that President Trump says are in the works with scores of countries, individual trade deals that they have a narrow window to hammer out.
They have a narrow window because, again, there has been a pause on the tariffs. However, I think there's enough anxiety across the country and with other countries as well to see where this goes. And I really actually think the tariff story is really one of the more defining highlights of the 100 days, because that is something that people are discerning and figuring out that that's going to affect them in major ways. They may not be able to understand a lot of some of these other moves, but the tariff issue is one that I think well after the 100 days we'll still be dealing with. But again, it was a campaign promise. It's something he did in his first term. And there were times where it was not popular during his first term. But because these new sets of tariffs are so sweeping and include so many countries, it has created so much alarm.
James?
The tariffs, I think, have been one of the big stories. It is what Trump talked about. He said tariff was his favorite word, the most beautiful word in the English language. He wanted to bring us back to the 1890s, and he really did do that. And I think a lot of people who took him seriously didn't take him literally on that, especially Wall Street, where they talked about how all these animal spirits were going to be ignited. And now there's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, which is very corrosive, very much freezing the economy. I expect that there are going to be a bunch of bilateral trade deals that are going to get negotiated very soon. Trump wants wins. Trump wants Rose Garden events where he is continuing to show momentum. I expect that there will be some deal announced with India, something with Japan, something with Korea. And then the big trade fight is going to be with China. And it does seem like there are people inside the Trump administration who want to decouple the United States and China, which would be an epic change to the U.S. and global economy, the first and second largest economy basically going through a divorce.
We're going to talk about polling and where Donald Trump is standing in the polls in a moment. But Emily, before we let you go, what are you watching in this transition here from this first 100 days, which is often a bit of a honeymoon period for administrations, also a chance to get some wins on the books in Congress? As James said, that has not been the focus. It's all been about EOs and action from the executive branch. What are you looking for going forward here?
I think an important point that I've been thinking about as we've talked is that very few people know that it's been 100 days or care that it's been 100 days. So I'm just interested, I guess, in how those subset of Americans who are not the most politically engaged, how they are experiencing this presidency, if they are having a hard time affording groceries, if they're having a hard time affording strollers and car seats for their kids, or if they see that this direction that the president is taking the country and they feel safer or more seen. So it's that like ground level impact that I'll be tracking most closely.
Emily Davies, thank you so much. Everybody else, stay with us. Washington Post polls, along with ABC, have a lot to reveal about how Americans are feeling about Donald Trump. Stay with us. This is Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey here with Rhonda Colvin and James Hohmann. Okay, it feels like every news outlet was polling Americans to get a pulse check on how they're feeling about the presidency. of Donald Trump. Rhonda, what stands out to you about the Washington Post ABC News poll?
Well, the main headline with our poll is showing that his approval rating has slipped since the last time we asked the same question to Americans. So the last time was in February, and right now the disapproval rating for President Trump is at 55%. So that is over half of Americans polled in this survey disapprove of his job. In February, when that same question was asked, 53%. So it's just a slight uptick, but it is a decline. There were a few other things that did in our reporting that did stand out to me from this poll. One, most Americans polled say they dislike his attempts to expand the powers of the presidency. That is not sitting well. And I remember reading about that back in our past poll, and people were having some discomfort of some of the early moves with Doge, kind of letting Elon Musk do some things that seemed out of norms. The other thing that stood out to me about our poll is it says on specific issues, his highest disapproval percentages were on his handling of the economy, on the U.S. relations with other countries, his handling with tariffs, but his highest disapproval overall was with tariffs. So a lot of people across parties, they aren't feeling good about the idea of tariffs and the implementation when these pauses are lifted.
And it's hugely significant because the economy has traditionally been Trump's strength, even during COVID, even after January 6th. When his overall numbers really hit rock bottom, a majority of people still approved of how he handled the economy. And now a majority disapprove. Nearly 2/3, basically just like 64% of the country oppose these tariffs that he's done. So he, partly because he didn't go to Congress to pass them, he just did this unilaterally and didn't really have the buy-in. So what has traditionally been a big strength has now become this weakness. And I think, to what I said a few minutes ago, that's part of the reason I expect there to be a bunch of bilateral deals, because Trump wants to show that he's basically fixing this mess that he created. It's so much the pattern of the last 100 days, which is Trump is sort of an arsonist who starts these fires, then puts them out and wants credit for doing so.
I mean, these are the lowest approval ratings of a new president in like decades and decades, in any modern memory, most people's living memory.
Yeah, I mean, he's just under 40%. And basically when you really drill into the crosstabs of our poll, which is fascinating, and this tracks with other polls, he has basically 40% support and then like 30% like hardcore support. 30% is really the rock bottom of like, you know, the people who are with him on basically everything. You know, one of the things on that approve of disapprove, do you approve or disapprove of the recent tumult in the stock market? 30% approved. And it's like, well,
Who are those 30%?
Volatility traders, you know, and those are just the people who are like ride or die Donald Trump. And that's a third of the country, right? So, but yeah, I mean, the majority of the country don't like where he's taking us.
Can I share with you some words that the New York Times polled on? This is the New York Times Siena poll. Voters used words to describe the second Trump presidency: 66% chaotic, 59% scary, 42% exciting. What do you read in that, James?
That we're a really polarized country. NPR asked it a different way. They asked everyone to give Trump a letter grade, and more people gave him an F than any other grade. And part of it is that there is like a independents have sort of moved against Trump. Independents allowed him to win. He narrowly won the election, got just under 50% of the national popular vote, won the popular vote, won the electoral college, won all 7 of the swing states. But the independents who sort of made that happen, who put him over the top, have drifted away. And a lot of them have sort of disengaged from politics. And then you have a large, hardcore anti-Trump constituency, and you have a large, not as large, very pro-Trump constituency. And then these people in the middle sort of feel, I think those words capture where a lot of the people in the middle of the country are.
Rhonda, what does it matter to be polling this way 100 days in? I mean, there's so much more of the presidency to go. We're not even at, like the Virginia governor's election, which is in the fall, or much less the midterms in 2026.
You know, it is an early benchmark, and it feels really early this time around because there has been so much happening. And I think because all of it's been happening all at once, it's hard to really get the temperature because, many people are struggling with figuring out, where to put their concerns at. But I do think that this also shows that there is either room for an even steeper decline for Trump and the Republican Party or room for growth. I mean, they're kind of still, because of what James said and the words you said, readers at the New York Times were saying, about the 100
polled,
days.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it shows you that the nation still is kind of mixed on Trump, even though there have been so many startling things to happen. So I think more time will tell. We'll see. And there's also I would also like to point out, there's also the unknown. Like there are so many things that we don't even know might happen between now and let's say the midterm elections that may influence voters. So we'll see.
So Trump certainly elicits emotions and feelings and reactions, not just here in America, but really he has shaken up the global order. Canada had an election just yesterday, and Mark Carney won a liberal victory, James, that really was unforeseen just a few months ago. Tell us what happened. And is this a bellwether on Donald Trump and his approval rating internationally in a way?
Donald Trump should be happy that Canada's not the 51st state right now and doesn't have House members because he wouldn't have done very well. It really did become a referendum on Trump. Instead of, what has been 10 years of liberal control, they have a lot of the same problems we do with housing shortages, cost of living, and there's a lot of fatigue. And the liberals—
Justin Trudeau was the prime minister for so long.
Right.
And yeah, it seemed like it was going to be a change election.
And they were able to avoid that. So there was a poll that was conducted the week of our inauguration in Canada that showed the Conservative Party leading by 23 points over the Liberals. And the way they do it, it's a parliamentary system. So you're not voting for prime minister, you're voting for your local Conservative or Liberal. And Liberals won and closed strong by really rallying against Trump and tying the Conservative to Trump. He had a lot of his campaign echoed Trump. He talked about Canada first, that kind of thing. I do think it is very revealing. On Saturday, the Australians are going to have an election, and polls suggest the same thing is happening, where the Conservative was going to win and now is trailing. And he had been campaigning on the idea of make Australia great again, MAGA. They've been wearing red hats at his rallies. And then even in the UK, Nigel Farage, who's like one of the OG Trump supporters, has just been a constant figure at Mar-a-Lago. He's been distancing himself from Trump. Recently criticized Trump on Ukraine, has criticized Trump on tariffs. And I think that really tells you where the people are. And it shows that Trump has really ruptured relations with a lot of our closest allies. I'm talking about Australia, the UK, and Canada.
Can we just to get a sense of this, let's play some tape from Mark Carney. This is after he won the election last night to show what was on his mind.
Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over.
Wow, that's pretty stunning to say in your victory speech, basically, for your party and yourself as prime minister.
It's a breakup, more in sorrow than in anger. He really is outlining how this system, this relationship between the United States and Canada that's existed since World War II, just continual integration, it has given so much prosperity to both countries. It's been imperfect, et cetera, but it has been the system for 75 years, and Trump has sort of broken it. And I mean, it's an amazing moment.
James Hohmann, Rhonda Colvin, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on Sidebar. We'll be back on Thursday. Talk to you soon.